SB797 found on page 1 of your docket summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I asked that this bill come following some teachings because it's very closely connected. Senate Bill 797 simply adds sexual orientation to the definition of unlawful discriminatory practice. And what this bill does is present a very simple decision for you today. Does discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity violate the public policy of the Commonwealth? This bill doesn't create any individual rights or causes of action. This bill has no fiscal impact. The Virginia Human Rights Act begins with a declaration of policy, which says that it is the public policy of the Commonwealth to protect individuals in the Commonwealth from unlawful discrimination. This bill simply extends that statement of policy to say that individuals in the Commonwealth should be protected from discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, in addition to the other enumerated bases. By asking you to vote for this bill, I'm asking you to align yourselves with the overwhelming number of Virginians who, regardless of faith, geography, or party, agree that such discrimination is wrong. I'm also asking you to align yourself with Governor McDonald, who said in the Executive Directive 1 that discrimination based on factors such as one's sexual orientation or parental status violates the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. Therefore, discrimination against enumerated classes of persons set forth in the Virginia Human Rights Act or discrimination against any class of persons without a rational basis is prohibited. If such discrimination violates the Constitution and is prohibited, then this legislature should clearly be on record that it is against the public policy of the Commonwealth. That's all this bill asks you to do. Put this legislature and the Commonwealth on record that discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is wrong. And Mr.
Thank you, Senator Locke. Understand. Before we move to that, let's see if there's any questions to the patron from the committee.
I guess I have a couple of questions.
Senator Pierce.
And I'm trying to get to this distinction between what we just passed, which I understand applies to our state workforce. Maybe Claire has the answer. First of all, an obvious question is, does this apply to religious institutions? And I see Claire shaking her head, but can somebody go on record and tell me how this applies to religious institutions, and if it does not?
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay. Claire Guthrie Gusting on behalf of the College of Virginia. This is the last bill that you saw was a bill to codify for the first time for all state employees with respect to all classes of discrimination that in our state workforce, the State Personnel Act says that discrimination based on a whole host of factors is wrong. And currently that's only in the executive order for state employees and provides the access to the grievance procedure. So it's a substantive commitment and process and an enforceable right, if you will, within that context. This bill is quite different. This bill simply, the Virginia Human Rights Act starts out by declaring, and it's a very unusual part of our code because we don't do this very often. Y'all very rarely put a policy statement in the front of a bill or in the front of a law. If you go through our statute books, there aren't many of them. This is one, and it just simply says it's against the public policy of the Commonwealth to discriminate against people, and then it lists a bunch of things. Currently, it does not include in that list either sexual orientation or gender identity. This would simply add those two factors to the policy statement. There is no enforceable right that that policy statement creates. There are later provisions of the Human Rights Act that import federally guaranteed statutory rights, etc., into the state law, but this bill does not amend those, and at some point in time, that might be appropriate. At this point, all the senator is asking you all to do is say, along with what the governor said in his executive directive, that discrimination on these bases won't be tolerated or shouldn't be tolerated and should be considered to be against the Commonwealth's public policy. And there's no direct application to any religious institution. Nothing anybody can bring. There's no lawsuit. There's nothing.
Senator Pierce.
I guess a follow-up question. I mean, listen. I mean, these are kind of obvious questions, but I guess I'll be the one speaking. I mean, if you have religious text that says something that someone says is anti-gay, for example, could that be the basis for a cause of action to say, gee, that shouldn't be taught in our public schools or shouldn't?
No, all this says is it's against the public policy of the Commonwealth to discriminate. That's all it says. Doesn't give anybody a cause of action, doesn't provide any vehicle for enforcing it. It simply says it's just a really bad idea to discriminate against anyone.
that complete your question? Other questions to the patron on the bill before we hear witnesses? Hearing none, Senator Locke, I think you have witnesses, and most of you, I think, were there before, so I'll just briefly repeat. Try to keep your comments concise and not repetitive, and let us know who you are and if you're representing an organization.
Reverend Jean Kupke, Senior Minister of Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond, Virginia, representing Unitarian Universalists and, I hope, reasonable religion. I am here to speak to the questions that may rise, concerns about how this may be resisted by other religions, and would this, in fact, threaten that. In no way shall this happen, but it is important as moral people for us to ask the question of why are we so slow to bring these words to a Declaration of Human Rights. Race is there. We know why it's there in Virginia history. We see that sex is there. We know why it's there. Does anyone here truly doubt that it is without penalty to be lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual in our society? We've heard testimony already in the past few minutes of what it has cost people. Let's not be afraid to stand on the moral legs of what is right. Do the thing that is necessary to protect all persons, especially now our returning servicemen and women who are protected under new rights from the federal government. Do we wait? Do we wait some more? Or will your grandchildren look and point to you and say, finally, the moral position was taken to prevent further discrimination against gays and lesbians? I beg you all to think for once that this is indeed what the people want and what the people need. I ask you to please consider the addition of sexual orientation to human rights legislation of the Commonwealth of Virginia. May it long, long reign as a place of equality for all.
Thank you. Please come forward.
Chairman, members of the committee, David Greenberg, representing organizing. We support this legislation because it's the right thing to do. And we urge you to support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, my name is Richard Hatch. I'm the president of the Central Virginia Central Labor Council, as well as the vice president of the AFL Virginia. Executive board, we also support this. I would point out, given my last testimony, is that we have a number of contracts that our members have with their employers in which they actually have this put into the language. That's only some. That's not all. The unfortunate part is that many times it is necessary to put that into the language of the agreement that the employees have with the employer. And so we strongly support this to set this as the standard that should be followed by all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please come forward.
Robert Jones, Virginia Education Association. Again, our legislative committee took a unanimous position in support of this legislation. Thank you, sir.
And I'm Brian Turner with the Virginia Conference of the American Association of University Professors, and we support this bill.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman of the committee, again, Drew Manico, representing the Law Academy of Virginia. I'd like to go on record and support this bill.
My name is Cameron Hunt, and I am very proud to say that I'm with the Church of the Holy Comforter and People of Faith for Equality, which represents many different denominations and denominational churches, including Presbyterians, Unitarian Universalists, Jean Kupke's church, and Jewish faiths as well. And we very wholeheartedly support this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Others in the audience who are here would like to be heard supporting the bill. If not, we'll hear from the opponents. Please come forward, identify yourself, and if you're representing an organization, please state that.
Yes, Jeff Caruso with the Virginia Catholic Bishops' Conference on opposition to this bill. This is a statement of policy of the Commonwealth. As such, it does not make any distinction between public entities and private entities, and therefore both are included in this policy statement. Our particular concern is religious freedom and freedom of conscience of religious organizations. I think it's important to note when we talk about sexual orientation that one can only manifest that in terms of some behavior or some speech. And there are times when that behavior or that speech could call into question whether we would have the freedom For example, in employment decisions, which are mentioned in this policy statement, or in situations involving our educational institutions. For example, let's say that we were considering hiring someone who would instruct in the area of religious education. And then we were to learn in the process of trying to discern that decision that that individual perhaps lived in a same-sex relationship that would be contrary to our teaching on marriage. We would need to have the freedom to be able to make decisions that would enable us to practice our own mission and our own values in our own institutions. I could present several more examples to you, but I think that gives a sense of what our opposition to this bill is. So we would ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Please come forward.
And the Yale Virginia Assembly of Independent Baptists, we elucidated our points exactly, and we concur completely with what he just said.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chris Friend of the Family Foundation, and as Jeff mentioned, we are very concerned that this would have an effect in the private arena, and particularly in the faith-based. And even if it didn't at this time, putting this in the code as a public policy of Virginia, I think opens the door to adding limited waivers. So for those reasons, we'll oppose. Thank you.
Thank you. Others in the audience who would like to speak in opposition to the bill? Senator Locke, we'll go back to you for the vote for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, the code safeguards all individuals within the Commonwealth from unlawful discrimination because of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions, age, marital status, or disability. What this simply requests is that sexual orientation be added to that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if there are no further questions, I move that Senate Bill 797 be reported.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded that Senate Bill 797 be reported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all the clerk will call the roll. Announce the vote.
7 yeas, 7 nays.
Vote on the vote of 7 to 7. The bill is not reported, remains in committee.